Ji-sun stared out of the small window in her cell. The dying red star outside cast a weak light that barely reached her face. This had been her view for 3 years now. Just the star, the blackness of space, and sometimes the small shuttles that brought new prisoners to this forgotten place. She pressed her hand against the cold metal wall. Her blue skin looked almost purple in the dim red light. 3 years in this cell. 3 years since the galactic hierarchy had taken everything from her. "Meal delivery," announced the mechanical voice. A small slot opened in her door, and a tray slid through. The same gray paste as yesterday, and the day before, and every day since she arrived. Ji-sun didn't move to take it. "Prisoner 24,601. Confirm meal receipt," the voice demanded. "Confirmed," Ji-sun said quietly. Her voice sounded strange to her own ears. How long had it been since she had spoken to anyone? The guards were mostly robots. The few living guards, the tall, scaly Crawl, rarely spoke to prisoners directly. She finally walked over and took the tray. The paste had no taste, but it kept her alive. She ate mechanically while looking at the small notebook on her bed, her most prized possession. The guards let her keep it, probably because they thought her scientific notes were useless now. Ji-sun finished eating and set the tray back in the slot. Then she picked up her notebook and opened it to a fresh page. Her fingers, with their 6 slender digits, moved quickly as she wrote new equations. They couldn't take her mind, not yet. As she wrote, she touched the small pendant hanging from her neck. It was her only other possession. A simple metal disc that projected a tiny hologram of her homeworld when opened. She hadn't opened it in months. The pain of seeing home was too much. Ji-sun had been the most respected xenobiologist on her planet. Her work on genetic compatibility between species promised to solve many problems across the galaxy. It could help with food production, medicine, and even allow different species to live on each other's worlds. But the galactic hierarchy saw her work differently. They claimed she was creating biological weapons. It was a lie, of course. The real reason was simpler. Her work threatened their control. If species could adapt to live anywhere, the hierarchy's tight grip on planet permissions and travel rights would weaken. So they arrested her during a conference, named her an enemy of galactic peace, and sent her to a prison that officially didn't exist. The Void, prisoners called it. A massive space station orbiting a dying star, far from any traveled routes. The perfect place to put people a hierarchy wanted to forget. Ji-sun closed her notebook and lay back on her hard bed. She tried to remember what real sunlight felt like on her skin. Xenax people like her needed more light than many species. In the dim cell, her skin had lost much of its natural glow. Sometimes she wondered if she would simply fade away. The daily routine never changed. Wake up when the lights brightened slightly. Eat the tasteless paste. Exercise in the small cell to keep her body from weakening. Write in her notebook. Sleep when the lights dimmed again. Repeat. Today seemed no different until the alarm started. At first, Ji-sun thought it might be another drill. The prison ran them occasionally to keep the few living guards alert. But this alarm sounded different, more urgent, less controlled. She rushed to her small window and pressed her face against it, trying to see what was happening. For several minutes, there was nothing unusual. Then she saw it, a ship approaching the station. Ji-sun blinked in surprise. This wasn't a regular prison transport. It was smaller, oddly shaped, and moved differently. Most ships in this part of the galaxy had smooth, curved designs that mimicked living things. This vessel was blocky and angular, with visible metal plates and what looked like manually attached parts. The ship docked at a rarely used port on the far side of the station. Ji-sun could barely see it from her angle, but she was certain this wasn't a scheduled arrival. The alarm stopped suddenly, leaving an eerie silence. Ji-sun stayed by the window, her heart beating faster than it had in years. Something different was happening. After 3 years of the same routine, any change was both exciting and frightening. Hours passed. Ji-sun paced her cell, unable to settle. The regular meal delivery didn't come. Even the dim lights didn't change on schedule. Whatever was happening had disrupted the prison's strict routines. When her cell door suddenly slid open, Ji-sun backed against the far wall. This had never happened outside of the rare inspection. A crawl guard stood there, its tall, scaled body filling the doorway. Its 4 yellow eyes blinked independently of each other. Against the wall, the guard ordered. Its voice was harsh and raspy, like all Krull voices. Ji-sun was already against the wall, but she pressed herself flatter. The guard entered and looked around her cell quickly. No unauthorized communications or technology in this sector, the guard said, more to itself than to her. I have nothing, Ji-sun said. Just my notebook and pendant. Both approved. The guard's eyes narrowed. There has been an unauthorized docking. Security protocols are activated. It looked at her carefully. Have you seen anything unusual? Ji-sun hesitated. The ship she had seen was definitely unusual, but something made her keep quiet about it. No, she said. I've seen nothing from my window except the star. The guard stared at her for a long moment. Ji-sun kept her face calm despite her racing heart. Finally, it turned and left, the door sliding shut behind it. Ji-sun let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Why had she lied? She wasn't sure. Perhaps after years of the hierarchy's injustice, she simply couldn't bring herself to help them. Night cycle came, but Ji-sun couldn't sleep. The strange ship, the alarms, the guards' questions, something important was happening. She was lying on her bed, staring at the ceiling, when she heard it, a faint metallic sound from the wall near her toilet unit. Ji-sun sat up slowly. The sound came again, like metal scraping against metal. Moving carefully, Ji-sun approached the wall. There was a small vent there, barely big enough to fit her arm through. As she got closer, the sound stopped. Ji-sun waited, hardly breathing. Then, from the vent, came a whisper. Hello. Is anyone there? The voice was unlike any Ji-sun had heard before, the universal trade language, but with strange sounds and emphasis. She knelt by the vent. Yes, she whispered back. Who are you? There was a pause before the voice replied. My name is Taiho. I'm human. Ji-sun felt a shock run through her body. Human. The newest species to join galactic society, barely 30 years since they'd developed faster than light travel. She had read about them, but never met one. What are you doing here? She asked. This is a high-security prison. I thought it was abandoned. The voice, Taiho, replied. I'm a salvage operator. I look for valuable materials in old stations. Ji-sun almost laughed at the absurdity. This human had mistaken one of the most secure prisons in the galaxy for an abandoned station. This is the Void, she explained quietly. A secret prison for people the galactic hierarchy wants to forget. There was silence from the vent. Then, and who are you? I am Ji-sun, a Synax scientist. I've been here for 3 years. What did you do? Taiho asked. Nothing, Ji-sun said bitterly. My research threatened their control, so they claimed I was making weapons. More silence. Ji-sun wondered if the human believed her. I need to go, Taiho finally whispered. Guards are searching the maintenance tunnels. But I'll come back. You should leave while you can, Ji-sun warned. If they catch you. I'll come back, Taiho repeated firmly. Then there was another scraping sound, and silence. Ji-sun returned to her bed, her mind racing. A human, here in the void. It seemed impossible. She touched her pendant, thinking of home and freedom for the first time in years. The human would probably try to leave as soon as possible. That would be the smart choice. No one would risk themselves for a stranger, especially a non-human one. But as Ji-sun drifted to sleep, a small, dangerous feeling grew in her chest. Something she had thought was long dead. Hope. Taiho crawled through the narrow maintenance tunnels of the space station, his breath loud in his ears. The guards had nearly caught him twice now. He wasn't sure why he kept risking his life instead of returning to his ship and leaving this place behind. 3 days had passed since he'd first spoken to the alien prisoner. Ji-sun, she called herself. In those 3 days, Tai-ho had learned more about the void and felt increasingly troubled by what he discovered. He reached a junction in the tunnels and paused to check his makeshift map. It was a simple device he had built himself, just a small screen showing the station layout he had downloaded from an unsecured terminal. The guards were looking for him, but they didn't seem very worried. After all, where could he go? The station was in the middle of nowhere, orbiting a dying star. Tai-ho hadn't planned any of this. He was just a salvage operator from Earth, working alone to find valuable materials in space. His ship, the Lucky Find, was small but reliable. When his scanners had detected the station, he thought he'd found something good. Old stations often had valuable metals and technology. Instead, he'd found a secret prison, and now he couldn't just leave. He checked the time. The guards would change shifts soon. That was his chance to reach Ji-sun's cell again. He needed to talk to her more, to understand why she was here. Tai-ho waited until the lights in the tunnel dimmed slightly, the sign of a shift change he had observed. Then he moved quickly to the vent near Ji-sun's cell. He tapped gently on the metal. "Ji-sun," he whispered. There was movement in the cell, and then her face appeared at the vent. In the dim light, Tai-ho could see her blue skin and large dark eyes. Sea-nacs were known for their intelligence and peaceful nature. What could she have done to end up here? "You came back," she said, sounding surprised. "I said I would." Tai-ho shifted to sit more comfortably. "I need to know more about this place. And about you." Ji-sun was quiet for a moment. "What do you want to know?" "Everything," Tai-ho said. "Why are you really here? Who else is locked up? How tight is the security?" "Those are dangerous questions," Ji-sun said softly. "But I will tell you what I know." For the next hour, Ji-sun explained her story in detail. She had been a respected scientist, working on ways different species could adapt to each other's environments. Her research threatened the galactic hierarchy's control over which species could live where. So they arrested her on false charges and locked her away. "There are others like me," she said. "Scientists, artists, political leaders, anyone who challenges how things are done. The hierarchy claims to bring peace and order to the galaxy, but they really just want control." Tai-ho listened carefully. Humans were still new to galactic society. Earth had only joined the galactic hierarchy 28 years ago, after discovering faster-than-light travel. Most humans still thought the hierarchy was a good thing, a way for different species to live together peacefully. "How many prisoners are there?" he asked. "I don't know exactly. Maybe 100. We're kept separate most of the time." Tai-ho nodded, thinking. The security seems focused on keeping people in, not keeping them out. Their systems are old. I was able to hack into some of them. Ji-sun's eyes widened. "What are you saying?" Tai-ho wasn't sure what he was saying. The smart thing would be to leave now. This wasn't his problem. But something about Ji-sun's story bothered him deeply. It wasn't right to lock someone up for their ideas. "I don't know yet," he admitted, "but I want to help somehow." "Why?" Ji-sun asked. "You don't know me. I'm not even human." Tai-ho shrugged. "That doesn't matter. What they did to you isn't right." Before Ji-sun could respond, alarms began to sound throughout the station. "They're doing another sweep," Ji-sun said urgently. "You need to go." Tai-ho nodded. "I'll be back. I promise." He crawled away quickly, following his map back toward the docking bay where his ship waited. The alarms made it harder to move unseen, but Tai-ho had learned the guards' patterns. He hid in a storage closet as a group of crawl guards rushed past, then continued on his way. When he finally reached his ship, Tai-ho sat in the pilot's seat and took a deep breath. He should leave now. Forget about Ji-sun and the other prisoners. Go back to his simple life of finding and selling scrap. Instead, he began to make plans. For the next week, Tai-ho worked carefully. He visited Ji-sun when he could, bringing her small things, real food, a better light for her cell, information about the outside world. In return, she told him more about the prison and the hierarchy. The Krail guards are loyal to the hierarchy because they get special rights, she explained during one visit. Their home planet was dying, and the hierarchy gave them new worlds to live on. Worlds taken from other species who couldn't fight back. How many guards are there? Tai-ho asked. Only about 20 Krull, I think. The rest are robots. That was good news. Robots followed programs. Programs could be hacked. During the day, Tai-ho worked on his ship, making it ready for what he was planning. At night, he explored more of the station, mapping its systems and finding its weaknesses. He discovered that the prison's main computer was old and poorly updated. The hierarchy probably thought no one would ever find this place, so they hadn't bothered with good security. On his ship, Tai-ho built small devices that could disrupt the robot guards. He studied the station's power systems and life support. Everything had a weakness. He just had to find it. On the 10th day, Tai-ho visited Ji-sun with a serious face. I have a plan, he said through the vent. But it's dangerous. If it works, I can get you out of here. If it fails, we'll both probably die. Ji-sun moved closer to the vent. Tell me. Tai-ho explained his plan. He would use his ship's systems to create a power surge in the station. When the emergency systems activated, the cell doors would unlock briefly before the backup power came on. In that short time, Ji-sun would need to get out of her cell and meet him at a specific location. What about the other prisoners? Ji-sun asked. Tai-ho hesitated. The plan was just for you. Adding more people makes it much more dangerous. Ji-sun's face hardened. I won't leave them. Many have been here longer than me. Some have families waiting for them. Tai-ho ran a hand through his hair, frustrated. Humans were still seen as unpredictable by other species in the galaxy. Now he understood why. Most aliens would make the logical choice. Save yourself first. But humans did things like risk their lives for strangers. Fine, he said finally. I'll adjust the plan. But it will be harder, and we'll need help from inside. Ji-sun's face softened. Thank you. I can help, and I think I know others who will too. Over the next few days, they refined the plan. Ji-sun spread the word to other prisoners through the food delivery system, passing tiny notes with instructions. Tai-ho prepared his ship and the devices they would need. On the day before the planned escape, Tai-ho visited Ji-sun one last time. Tomorrow, he said, when the red star is directly visible from your window, be ready. Ji-sun nodded. I'll be ready. She paused, then added, Why are you really doing this, Tai-ho? The truth. Tai-ho thought about it. On Earth, we have an old saying, all that is necessary for evil to triumph is for good people to do nothing. I found this place by accident, but now that I know about it, I can't just do nothing. Ji-sun's dark eyes studied him. Humans are strange, she said finally, but I'm glad you found me. Me too, Tai-ho said. Get some rest. Tomorrow will be hard. As he crawled away from her cell for the last time, Tai-ho wondered if he was making a huge mistake. The plan had so many ways it could go wrong, but he kept thinking about Ji-sun, locked away for years just for her ideas. It wasn't right. Tomorrow, he would either free her or die trying. Either way, the galactic hierarchy was about to learn that humans didn't like unjust systems, and they weren't afraid to break them. Ji-sun stood by her cell window, watching the red star. Today was the day. Freedom or death. Either way, her time in this prison would end. She touched the small pendant around her neck, then checked that her notebook was safely tucked into the pocket she had made in her prison uniform. These small things were all she had left of her old life. She wasn't leaving them behind. The red star moved slowly into position. Ji-sun took deep breaths to calm herself. In just minutes, Tai-ho would begin the plan. Suddenly, the lights in her cell flickered. Once, twice, then went out completely. The emergency lights came on, casting everything in a dull red glow. Then came the sound Ji-sun had been waiting for, the soft click of her cell door unlocking. She pushed against the door. It slid open easily. For the first time in 3 years, Ji-sun stepped out of her cell without guards. The hallway was dim, lit only by emergency lights. Other cell doors were opening too. Confused faces looked out, prisoners who hadn't been part of the plan, unsure what was happening. Power failure. Ji-sun called out to them. The backup systems will restart soon. If you want freedom, follow me now. Some prisoners shrank back in fear. Others stepped out cautiously. A few ran in different directions, just wanting to get away. Ji-sun didn't have time to convince everyone. She had to get to the meeting point Taeho had chosen. She ran down the hallway, following the path she had memorized from Taeho's descriptions. Behind her, she heard footsteps, other prisoners following her lead. At the first junction, a robot guard appeared. Its sensors blinked as it detected the escaped prisoners. "Return to your cells immediately," it announced in a flat voice. "This is an unauthorized." The robot suddenly sparked and fell over. Behind it stood a tall alien with green skin and 4 arms. Ji-sun recognized him as Nalbai, a political prisoner from the Quadrant system. "Your human friend gave me this," Nalbai said, holding up a small device. "It disrupts their circuits. He left several at the points you told him about." Ji-sun nodded. "Thank you. We need to keep moving." They continued through the station, gathering more prisoners as they went. Not all sections had lost power. Some doors remained locked, the prisoners behind them calling out desperately. Ji-sun felt guilty leaving them, but they couldn't stop to try breaking the doors open. "There's a maintenance shaft ahead," Ji-sun told the group, now about 15 strong. "It leads to Docking Bay 7, where Taeho's ship is waiting." As they turned a corner, they came face to face with 2 crawl guards. Unlike the robots, the living guards weren't affected by the power problems. The Krails drew their shock sticks, weapons that could paralyze with a single touch. "Prisoners, stop now," the taller Krull ordered. "This escape attempt is futile." The prisoners stopped, uncertain. Ji-sun looked around frantically for another way. There wasn't one. Suddenly, a small metal object flew over their heads and landed between the guards. It made a high-pitched noise, and the Krails clutched their heads in pain. Their species had sensitive hearing, and the sound was clearly agonizing to them. "Move," came a voice from behind them. Taeho appeared, wearing a strange helmet that must have protected him from the sound. "That won't hold them long." Ji-sun felt relief wash over her at the sight of the human. Even after all their planning, part of her had worried he might not come. "This way," Taeho said, leading them down a side passage. "The main route is too heavily guarded now." They've figured out what's happening. The alarms were getting louder. Red emergency lights flashed everywhere. Over the station speakers, a cold voice repeated, "Security breach in progress. All guards to containment positions. Lethal force authorized." Taeho led them through narrow maintenance tunnels, places the guards would have trouble following. Ji-sun had to crouch to fit through some sections. For the larger aliens in their group, it was even harder. "How much further?" Ji-sun asked as they stopped to help a particularly large prisoner through a tight spot. "Not far," Taeho said, "but we have a problem. I can see on my scanner that they've sent guards to my ship. We need to find another way out." Ji-sun's heart sank. "Is there another way?" Taeho's face was grim. "Maybe. There are prison transport ships in Docking Bay 3. If we can reach one, I might be able to get it working." They changed direction, moving through even smaller passages. One older prisoner couldn't keep up and decided to hide instead, hoping to escape later. Ji-sun wanted to wait for him, but they couldn't stop. Finally, they'd reached a small hatch. Taeho checked his scanner again. "Docking Bay 3 is through here. There are guards, but not as many as at my ship. We'll have to be fast." He handed out more of the small devices that disrupted the robot guards and gave sound emitters to those who would lead the charge. "Ready?" he asked, looking at Ji-sun. She nodded, though her heart was pounding with fear. This was the most dangerous part of their escape. Tai-ho opened the hatch, and they poured into the docking bay. Immediately, alarms blared louder. 3 robot guards turned toward them, but the disruptor devices quickly took them down. A crawl guard appeared from behind a transport ship, firing a stun weapon. The beam hit one of the prisoners, who fell to the ground, body shaking. Tai-ho threw another sound emitter, and the Krell dropped his weapon to cover his ears. Another prisoner, a strong 4-armed Quatrin, rushed forward and knocked the guard unconscious. "To the ship," Tai-ho shouted, pointing to the nearest transport. It was larger than his salvage vessel, designed to carry many prisoners. They ran for it. Ji-sun helped a limping prisoner along. Behind them, more guards were entering the bay. "Stop them," came a harsh voice. "Shoot to kill." Energy beams flashed past them. One hit the wall near Ji-sun's head, leaving a black scorch mark. She ran faster, practically dragging the injured prisoner with her. Tai-ho reached the transport first and worked quickly to open its door. The prisoners crowded around, providing some cover as he worked. "Almost got it," Tai-ho muttered. His fingers moved fast over the control panel. A beam hit one of the prisoners, protecting them. The alien fell with a cry of pain. The guards were getting closer. "Tai-ho," Ji-sun called urgently. "Done," he shouted as the door slid open. "Everyone in." The prisoners rushed inside. Tai-ho stayed at the door, helping them board. Ji-sun was one of the last, still helping the injured prisoner. As she reached the door, a beam struck Tai-ho in the shoulder. He stumbled backward with a grunt of pain. "Tai-ho," Ji-sun cried out, letting go of the prisoner to catch the human before he fell. "I'm okay," he said through gritted teeth. "Get inside." Together, they stumbled into the ship. The door closed behind them, just as more beams hit it with dull thuds. Inside the transport, chaos reigned. Prisoners were everywhere, some injured, all scared. Tai-ho pushed through them to reach the control room, still holding his wounded shoulder. "Does anyone know how to fly this thing?" he called out. A thin alien with pale yellow skin stepped forward. "I was a pilot before they arrested me." Tai-ho nodded and pointed to the controls. "Can you fly it?" The alien looked at the panel. "I think so. The basics are similar to other hierarchy ships." "Good," Tai-ho said. "Get us out of here." Ji-sun found medical supplies in a cabinet and brought them to Tai-ho. As she treated his wound, the ship's engines came to life. "They're trying to lock us down," the pilot called. "The docking clamps won't release." Tai-ho looked up. "Override them." "Emergency protocol Delta 7. The pilot punched in the code. With a loud clank, the clamps released. "How did you know that?" Ji-sun asked as she bandaged Tai-ho's shoulder. He gave her a weak smile. "I've been studying hierarchy systems for the past 2 weeks. Turns out they use the same emergency codes everywhere." The ship lurched forward, breaking free of the station. Through a small window, Ji-sun could see the void growing smaller behind them. The red star that had been her only view for 3 years was now just one of many points of light in the blackness of space. "We did it," she whispered, hardly believing it. Tai-ho nodded, his face pale from pain, but his eyes bright. "Not quite yet. They'll send ships after us. We need to reach neutral space." Ji-sun looked around at the other prisoners. 23 in all had made it to the ship. Some were injured, all were tired, but there was hope in their eyes now. "Where will we go?" she asked. "I know a place," Tai-ho said. "A space station at the edge of hierarchy territory. It's run by independents. We should be safe there." Ji-sun nodded. Then, following an impulse she didn't quite understand, she reached out and took Taiho's hand in hers. "Thank you," she said simply, "for coming back, for helping us." Taiho looked surprised at the touch, but then he smiled and squeezed her hand gently. "You're welcome," he said. "Rest now. We have a long journey ahead." As the ship accelerated into the darkness, Ji-sun felt something she had almost forgotten: the feeling of freedom and the promise of a new beginning. The stolen prison transport ship shook violently. Alarms blared as warning lights flashed red across the control panel. Ji-sun grabbed a nearby rail to keep from falling as the ship lurched again. "What's happening?" she asked, making her way to where Taiho sat at the secondary controls. "They're firing on us," he said, his face grim. "Two hierarchy patrol ships caught up to us." Through the main window, Ji-sun could see the sleek hierarchy vessels. They were much faster than the bulky transport ship. Another blast hit them, and more alarms started ringing. "Shields at 30%, called the pilot, the yellow-skinned alien named Daewon. "We can't take much more of this." Taiho worked quickly at his panel, his injured shoulder clearly causing him pain. "We need to lose them somehow." Jae-sun looked at the star map displayed on a small screen. "There," she pointed. "An asteroid field. The transport ship is strong. Maybe we can use that." Taiho looked at where she was pointing and nodded. "Good idea. Daewon, change course. Head for those asteroids." The pilot adjusted their path, and the transport ship turned toward the distant cluster of space rocks. The patrol ships followed, still firing. "Everyone hold on to something," Taiho shouted to the other prisoners gathered in the main area. "This will be rough." The ship entered the asteroid field. Huge rocks floated all around them, some as small as the ship, others as large as mountains. Daewon guided the transport between them carefully while Taiho worked to reroute power to the shields. Behind them, the patrol ships hesitated at the edge of the field. "They're holding back," Ji-sun said, watching the scanner. "Their ships are faster but more fragile." "Good," Taiho said. "Let's get deeper into the field." For an hour, they navigated the dangerous path through the asteroids. The patrol ships tried to follow it first, but gave up when one was damaged by a collision. Eventually, the scanner showed they were alone. "We lost them," Daewon said, his voice tired but relieved. Taiho nodded. "For now. But they'll report to the hierarchy. They'll know where we're headed." "Can we change course?" Jae-sun asked. "We don't have enough fuel," Taiho said. "This transport wasn't meant for long journeys. It was only designed to take prisoners from main ships to the prison station." Jae-sun bit her lip, thinking. Her scientific mind quickly reviewed what she knew about the ship. What if we could make more fuel? Or find a way to use less? Taiho looked at her with interest. "What do you mean?" "I'm a xenobiologist, but I studied energy systems too," Jae-sun explained. "If you have tools, I might be able to modify the engines to be more efficient." For the next several hours, Ji-sun worked with Taiho in the engine room. Other prisoners helped where they could. Ji-sun was surprised by how easily they all worked together despite being different species. The common experience of imprisonment had created a bond between them. While they worked, Ji-sun and Taiho talked. She learned about Earth and human culture, how humans had developed faster than light travel only 30 years ago, how they had joined the galactic hierarchy with high hopes, not yet understanding its dark side. "My people thought the hierarchy was a good thing at first too," Ji-sun said as she carefully adjusted a power coupling. "We believed their promises of peace and cooperation. By the time we realized the truth, it was too late. They had too much control over our planet's resources." Taiho handed her a tool. "Earth is starting to see it now. There have been protests about hierarchy regulations. They limit our colonization rights, control what technology we can develop. That's how it starts," Ji-sun said. "Small controls that seem reasonable at first." They worked in comfortable silence for a while. Ji-sun found herself watching Taiho when he wasn't looking. Humans were strange looking to most alien species, their flat faces, odd coloration, and hair growing only on their heads. But Ji-sun was starting to find Tae-ho's features interesting rather than strange. "Why did you really come back for me?" she asked suddenly. "You could have left after you found out it was a prison." Tae-ho paused in his work. "I told you. It wasn't right, what they did to you." "Many things aren't right in the galaxy," Ji-sun said. "Most people don't risk their lives to fix them." Tae-ho thought for a moment. "My grandmother used to tell me stories about Earth's history, about people who fought against unfair systems. Some succeeded, some failed, but she said the important thing was that they tried." He smiled slightly. "She would have liked you." Jae-sun felt a warmth in her chest at his words. It had been so long since anyone had spoken to her like a person, not a prisoner. After 12 hours of work, they had increased the engine efficiency by nearly 40%. It might be enough to reach the independent station Tae-ho had mentioned. As they left the engine room, an alarm sounded, but not a warning alarm. This was different. "What's that?" Jae-sun asked. "Communication alert," Tae-ho said, rushing to the control room. Jae-sun followed. On the main screen was the face of a Krull, but not a guard. This one wore the insignia of a hierarchy commander. "Transport vessel," the Krull said in the harsh voice typical of its species. "You have committed multiple crimes against the galactic hierarchy. Return to authorized space immediately or be destroyed." Tae-ho looked at Day 1. "How far are we from the independent station?" "About 6 hours," the pilot replied quietly. "Too long," Ji-sun said. "They'll catch us before then." Tae-ho thought for a moment, then stepped forward to respond to the message. "This is Tae-ho of Earth. We refuse to return to unjust imprisonment. These people were locked away for challenging the hierarchy's control, not for any real crimes." The Krull commander's face showed no emotion. "Your species is too new to understand galactic order, human. Last warning. Return or be destroyed." The communication ended. On the scanner, 5 new dots appeared, hierarchy warships moving to intercept them. "They're serious," Dai-1 said, his yellow skin paling. "Those are battle cruisers." The mood in the control room turned dark. They had come so far, but now it seemed hopeless. The escaped prisoners looked at each other with despair. Jae-sun refused to give up. "There must be something we can do. Tae-ho, you've surprised me at every turn. Surely you have one more idea." Tae-ho stared at the scanner, thinking hard. Then his eyes widened. "Actually, I do." He turned to the communications panel. "The hierarchy isn't the only power in this part of space. Let's call for help." He began sending a message on an unusual frequency. Ji-sun watched, confused. "Who are you contacting?" "The Free Systems Alliance," Tae-ho said. "A group of independent worlds that resist hierarchy control. They have a hidden base not far from here." "How do you know this?" Jae-sun asked. Tae-ho gave her a small smile. "I'm not just a salvage operator. I sometimes transport supplies for the Alliance. I was supposed to make a delivery after finding salvage in this sector." For an hour, they continued toward the independent station while sending the distress call. The hierarchy ships drew closer with each passing minute. "They're in firing range," Dai-1 reported grimly. Just then, the scanner showed new ships appearing. 6 vessels of different designs, all moving quickly toward them. The communication screen lit up again, but this time showed a human woman with dark skin and bright eyes. "This is Captain Han of the Free Systems Alliance. Hold your position. Transport vessel. We've got you covered." Relief washed over the control room. The Alliance ships moved between them and the hierarchy cruisers. Being in neutral space, the hierarchy couldn't attack without causing a major diplomatic incident. After a tense standoff, the hierarchy ships turned away. They had lost this battle. 6 hours later, they docked at the independent station, a massive wheel-shaped structure floating at the edge of hierarchy space. Alliance personnel helped the weakest prisoners to medical facilities. Others were given temporary quarters. Jae-sun stood with Tae-ho at a large window, looking out at the stars. For the first time in years, she saw them not as distant points she could never reach, but as possibilities. "What will you do now?" Tae-ho asked. Jae-sun touched her pendant, the small disc containing the image of her homeworld. For so long, it had been her only connection to her past life. Now, she had a future to think about. "I want to continue my research," she said. "The Alliance has scientists who might help me." "What about you?" "I need a new ship," Tae-ho said with a small laugh. "Mine is still at the prison station." Jae-sun turned to face him. "I have a better idea. Your ship was for one person, but what if we found a larger one? I could help with your salvage work, and maybe we could help the Alliance too." Tae-ho looked surprised. "You want to stay with me?" "Yes," Jae-sun said simply. "You found me when I was caged and forgotten. Now I want to find others like me. There are more prisoners out there, more people the hierarchy wants to silence." Tae-ho smiled, a warm human expression that Jae-sun had come to treasure. "I'd like that." Jae-sun looked back at the stars. The hierarchy was still powerful. They were just two people against a vast system. But sometimes, that was enough to start something bigger. She opened her pendant for the first time in years. The hologram of her homeworld appeared between them, blue and beautiful. After a moment, Jae-sun closed it again. "I don't need this anymore," she said. "Home isn't a place. It's where you choose to be." As the station rotated slowly, bringing new stars into view, Jae-sun felt something she had almost forgotten: hope for the future, and the certainty that she was exactly where she needed to be. With a human by her side and freedom ahead, the galaxy suddenly seemed full of possibilities.